66 million years ago, a king ruled the land. His name was Tyrannosaurus rex, the tyrant lizard king, and his kingdom was a world of lush green forests and sprawling floodplains. He was the apex, the ultimate predator, a 40-foot, 9-ton marvel of evolution. His roar was the law of the land, a sound that sent tremors not just through the ground, but through the very hearts of every creature that heard it. For millions of years his kind had reigned supreme, their dominance absolute, their future seemingly endless. But on one particular day, the last day of the Cretaceous period, the king would face a threat not of flesh and bone, but from the cold, indifferent cosmos. This is the story of that day. This is the story of the last roar of the Tyrant King. Our story begins in the humid, misty morning of what would become a world-altering day. The great Tyrannosaurus rex, a magnificent bull in his prime, moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and majestic. His massive legs, each step a testament to his power, carried him along the edge of a dense fern-covered forest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, cycads, and the promise of a hunt. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, scanned the landscape. His world was a familiar tapestry of sounds and smells, a rhythm he knew intimately. He was the conductor of this prehistoric orchestra, and his hunger was the driving beat. But this morning the rhythm was off. Something was dissonant, a note of anxiety played across the land. The usually scattered herds of Edmontosaurus, the great duck-billed hadrosaurs, were clumped together in tight, nervous bunches near the riverbank. They weren't grazing peacefully. Their heads were up, their wide eyes scanning the skies, their calls low and filled with unease. They were prey, and their fear was a language the T-Rex understood better than any other. Yet their fear wasn't directed at him. He stood partially concealed by the giant ferns, a mountain of muscle and teeth, and they barely seemed to register his presence. This was wrong. Even the smaller predators were acting strangely. A pair of Dacotaraptors, usually cunning and silent hunters, were engaged in a pointless, snarling squabble on a nearby ridge. They snapped and shrieked at each other, not over a carcass, but seemingly at nothing at all. It was as if a collective madness had descended upon the valley. The T-Rex let out a low, guttural growl of annoyance. The disruption irritated him. It spoiled the hunt. He took a step forward, his colossal foot crushing a tree fern with an indifferent crunch. He was the king. His presence should have restored order, sent the prey scattering in a predictable panic. But it didn't. The world remained stubbornly out of tune. He shook his massive head, a motion that sent a small shower of dust and leaf litter cascading from the heavy, keratinous crests above his eyes. As he did, he felt it. A deep, resonant tremor that vibrated up through the solace of his feet, through his dense leg bones, and into the very core of his being. It wasn't an earthquake. He'd felt plenty of those. This was different. It was a low, sustained rumble that seemed to come not from beneath the earth, but from the horizon itself. It was a sound without source, a feeling more than a noise. The birds, the small pterosaurs roosting in the treetops, took to the air in a single, panicked cloud, their cries sharp and piercing. The T-Rex stood motionless, his head cocked, his senses on high alert. He was a creature of instinct, a being honed by millions of years of survival. Every fiber of his being, every primal impulse screamed at him, danger. This was a danger unlike any he had ever known. It wasn't the scent of a rival male, the challenge of a triceratops, or the desperation of starving prey. This was something other, something alien, something that didn't belong in his world. He raised his head to the sky and unleashed a roar. But this roar was different from his usual proclamations of dominance. It wasn't a challenge or a threat. It was deeper, more resonant, a sound that seemed to carry a question. It was a roar of warning, a desperate attempt to impose his will upon a world that was suddenly refusing to listen. The sound boomed across the valley, a thunderous wave that silenced the panicked calls of the lesser creatures. For a moment the forest held its breath, waiting for the king's power to reassert itself. Leaves, dislodged by the sheer force of the roar, fluttered down around him like green confetti. But then the ground shook again, harder this time. The rumble grew louder, a continuous, deafening groan that seemed to be tearing the sky apart. The king stumbled, his powerful legs struggling to maintain balance on the quivering earth. He looked around, a profound confusion clouding his predatory certainty. What was this? What could shake the world with more force than his own tread? What could make a sound louder than his own roar? His gaze was drawn upward, toward the hazy blue canvas of the sky. And there he saw it, a new star. A star where no star should be, visible in the full light of day. It was a tiny pinprick of brilliant, unnatural light, and it was growing. It glowed with a terrifying intensity, a white-hot spark against the familiar blue. He stared at it, his brain, designed to track the subtlest movements of prey, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. This object didn't move like a bird or a pterosaur. It simply grew, becoming brighter and larger with every passing second. A strange, ethereal tail of smoke and light began to trail behind it, painting a horrifying scar across the heavens. The Tyrant King had never known fear. He was the embodiment of power, the pinnacle of nature's brutal artistry. He had faced down rivals that matched his size and fury, hunted prey that could kill with a single, well-aimed horn. Fear was what he inspired in others. It was the scent that led him to his next meal. But in this moment, staring at the growing light in the sky, a new, cold sensation seeped into his ancient consciousness. It was a deep, primal dread, an understanding that transcended thought. It was the instinctual knowledge that some forces were beyond challenging, that some powers could not be fought. It was the terrifying realization that even kings could fall. The air grew hot. A strange wind, carrying the scent of ozone and burning rock, swept through the forest, bending the giant trees. The light in the sky was no longer a star. It was a sun, a second sun, blazing with an impossible, blinding fury. The king took an involuntary step back, his great body tensing. The rumble from the horizon had become an all-consuming physical presence, a pressure that squeezed the very air from his lungs. He could feel the heat on his scaly hide, a searing warmth that promised annihilation. He looked at his kingdom one last time. He saw the terrified herds, the scattering predators, the ancient forest that had been his dominion for his entire life. It was all about to be erased. He didn't understand why or how. His mind could not grasp the concept of an asteroid, of an impact event, of global extinction. He only knew that the sky was falling and the world was ending. With the last of his strength, facing the impossible light, the Tyrannosaurus Rex did the only thing he knew how to do. He planted his feet, arched his mighty neck, and let out one final, magnificent roar. It was not a roar of warning or confusion. It was a roar of defiance, a roar of rage. A roar against the dying of the light. It was the roar of a king who, even in the face of oblivion, would not be silent. It was the last sound he would ever make, a final, thunderous cry of existence before the sky turned to fire and the world he knew was silenced forever.